Hello and welcome to a new video. Today I want to talk about some of the things that I hope would be in Cyberpunk 2077, and I'll be telling you about them over the endlessly looping E3 trailer. Considering the game is still early in development and years away according to the developers, I see no reason not to speculate or put out a small wish list of things that I hope would be in the game. But I will still try to take into account all of the things that have been confirmed so far. So with nothing much else to say, let's begin. The first thing that I hope the game has to offer is the freedom to kill just about anyone. To put this in perspective, my favorite RPG of all time is Fallout New Vegas. And in that game, with the exception of children who would be far too controversial than it would be worth to be able to kill in, the only character who's absolutely essential is Yes Man. And that's only because if you decide to slaughter everyone else in the Mojave Wasteland, he at least offers you an opportunity to finish the game. That is a ridiculous amount of freedom available to you, and I would hope that the same sort of freedom is available in Cyberpunk 2077. Whether it be your companion, whether it be any of the NPCs, whether it be any slumlord or high corporate, it could be extremely difficult to kill some of these people. And of course, it's very unlikely that most players would want to be slaughtering most of the population, but having the opportunity available to you, I think, shows a lot of initiative and shows a lot of willingness to let the player experiment around and carve their own path. It's not railroaded, it's not holding your hands by preventing you from hurting this one NPC that may or may not have any significant importance to the story. So that's the first thing. The second thing I hope for is a good character creation system. The Witcher series, which I haven't played because I'm not interested in medieval fantasy settings, has you play as Geralt. And the reason for that is because the games are based off of existing literature. Cyberpunk 2077 is based off of a tabletop pen and paper RPG, Cyberpunk 2020, which inherently is going to be based on creating your own character and seeing how well they'll survive in the world based on the variables you give in that character and the decisions you make along the way. And sure enough, you'll be able to sort of create your character. The character will always be named V, but how the character looks, certain background elements, the character's stats, those will be decided by you. According to the Mad Queen show, who was one of the people who saw the behind closed doors preview of the demo, or just a demo preview in general, I guess, the character creation system in Cyberpunk 2077 is actually pretty limited, all things considered. It, according to her, is going to be based off of placeholders that you can select from, rather than something like Fallout 4 or Black Desert Online, where you're sculpting just the minute aspects of your character's face, or even Fallout New Vegas and Skyrim where it's based off of sliders. The reason this comes off as very odd to me is the developers themselves in interviews have said that you'd be able to spend like a long time just creating your character alone. But if it is going to be based off of presets, it seems like the sort of thing that would be completed fairly quickly. Unless there's just hundreds and hundreds upon hundreds of variations of these presets. It just seems like an odd contradiction. Since a game isn't even close to complete according to the developers, who insist it's still years away despite all the progress that's evident in these trailers, it could be, as some people have speculated, that it's a placeholder and an actual character creation system that's much more up to date with what's possible these days will be implemented in the final release. And I do hope that ends up being true. But if not, it really is a sort of downgrade. Another aspect of the character creation is you can choose your character's backstory, similar to the Mass Effect games. And with that, I simply hope that there's a lot of variation with it. Your character is always going to be a mercenary for hire, someone people pays to kill others or maybe retrieve an item or two, which is a general plot for the demo at E3 from what I've heard. But of course there can always be additional stuff beyond that. In Fallout New Vegas, your character is always going to be a courier, but what your character would do on the side, what your character has done in the years past, how your character has acted throughout it, that's up to you. So I do hope there's, in general, some variation. A third thing I hope is in the game, other than being able to kill everyone and a better character creation system, is sort of an inverse of the first thing, where I hope that in the game not every single problem is solved strictly by shooting people in the face. Once again, bringing up Fallout New Vegas, one of the most interesting things about that game is a character using speech or their intellect is just as viable as a character using their guns or explosives or laser weapons. Now, not every single battle in New Vegas can be solved by peaceful means. Sometimes you just have to shoot people in the face. And of course, the Cyberpunk universe doesn't exactly offer itself much leeway to peace. Pacifists just don't seem to live very long, especially in a setting that's been called the worst place to live in America. But I do hope that they offer at least some variation of opportunities in order to solve problems other than just strictly shooting the people in the face. According to, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, Yong Ye, he mentioned that hacking, sneaking, and even in some encounters, talking people into submission were methods used in the gameplay demo to show just what can be done. And I just hope that sort of carries over into the rest of the game, because I do like playing characters who, in addition to being able to fire a gun, are able to use their knowledge about the world or technology or whatever to solve issues, or are able to use diplomatic means to solve issues. I mean, how does the saying go? Talk softly and carry a big stick. I'm sure the people at CD Projekt Red, being well regarded as makers of RPG games, do understand the value of having multiple ways to solve things. Though I do question how many ways there will be for each encounter. A fourth thing I really hope for is good movement. Since the game does, despite my previous desire, seem to focus a lot on gunplay, I do hope that there's a sort of satisfaction when it comes to shooting and moving around and maneuvering in order to shoot your enemies. Another thing that I do think Fallout 4 did well was exactly that. The gunplay is the best I've seen in the Fallout series. It's unfortunate that it came at the expense of the game being an actual RPG, but I suppose that is for a different video entirely. Aside from just the combat, being able to get around quickly, having maybe a decent running speed, that could just go a long way to making it not as frustrating as it could be maneuvering around this sprawling metropolis. Of course, there's going to be driving, which I hope is also satisfying. One thing I do kind of wonder is, according to Yong Ye, during the demo, they showed the character using those scythes from the announcement video like a fucking decade ago, or however long it's been. You know, so long ago that people could have started high school when that video came out and are getting their diplomas when the E3 trailer was played. But the character used those scythes to crawl on the walls and then drop down on a pair of enemies. I kind of wonder, are you able to use those like outside of combat? Like, theoretically, could you be climbing up any of the tall buildings you see in the background using those scythes like the character was able to in combat? Or is there going to be like a limitation with when you're able to use that? It wouldn't necessarily bother me if you could or could not use those outside of combat. It's, I guess, just a bit of a tangent, a bit of a question I have, having heard about the demo and heard the demo from that leaked audio, but not actually seeing it. One thing I was hoping for that has both been confirmed and denied is a better dialogue system. I'm not a fan of the voice protagonist thing. I much prefer like Skyrim or New Vegas, where you just read out the entirety of what your character says, select that, and then whoever you're talking to reacts to that particular line of text. But I can at least abide by it, since the developers have confirmed that rather than relying on the shitty like 4 or 5 dialogue wheel prompt, the stuff you see in Telltale games, the stuff you saw in Detroit Become Human, the stuff you see in Fallout 4, they're going to have a list on the bottom of the screen that you can scroll through in order to choose what your character will say. This is very important because not every response to somebody saying something has to have like an arbitrary limit to it. It doesn't need an arbitrary maximum, it doesn't need an arbitrary minimum. If there's only 2 reasonable responses, it can be 2 reasonable responses. But if there's like 8 possible responses because your character has a bunch of different upgrades and skill sets that let them call out bluffs or notice things that the other person hopes you didn't, or anything like that, it'd be kind of crappy to sort of limit it to only a select number of options. So I do like the fact that they're going to be ditching the limited amount of dialogue in favor of something that can be a lot more open. And with that, I hope that the skills that your character acquires along the way, be it certain augmentations or maybe your character noticing certain things in the environment, can factor into those conversations and provide additional avenues of dialogue. One thing I am sort of worried about, especially considering the overall lore of the universe, is that the entire thing about transhumanism in the game, which was talked about in some shitty Polygon article, is that it'll all boil down to, cybernetics corrupts the soul. Cybernetics makes you inherently evil and distant from humanity, and that is something that is part of the tabletop lore. There's this thing called cyberpsychosis where if you get too augmented, you'll eventually lose your ability to empathize with other human beings and go on a murderous rampage, which is very likely what happened in the announcement trailer of the girl with those scythe hands. The reason that exists in the RPG, the tabletop RPG, is to prevent characters from just buying up every single upgrade they possibly can and being utterly overpowered. Survival was a big aspect of it, and if you are far too upgraded that nothing can possibly put a dent in you, then of course you're just going to breeze through whatever the dungeon master or whatever tries to throw at you. However, of course, since that is an established part of the lore, they have to put it into this new game. And I don't necessarily mind that, I just hope that it's not all a strictly one-sided thing. I'm aware that intrinsically Cyberpunk presents a very bleak view of what the future could be like. Technology has improved, society has not. We have all these incredible augmentations, and yet we're still abiding by the same capitalist system that has existed before any of this was possible. And of course there's going to be problems cropping up with that. If economics and general philosophy and general society can't catch up with the rapid pace of technology, problems are going to be had, and you can even see that in real life now, but that's something for a different video entirely. But if they are going to be talking a bunch about transhumanism, as one of the developers said in the Polygon article, I just really hope that it isn't one-sided. I hope it doesn't have the intellectual weight of Detroit Become Human, for example, when it comes to the conversations that game is trying to start. It can have nuance, it can show a lot of upsides and say this is why this technology is good, and it can also show some downsides and say this is how this technology can turn out to be bad for us. which, being a cyberpunk setting, it already has that advantage, so I think it's an uphill battle in as far as nuance is concerned for trying to present it in a positive light. Now this, I guess, is more of a political stance or a philosophical stance, a personal stance than anything. You just look down and see the name of my YouTube channel and you'll get a good idea of why I have this worry. But nonetheless, it is something that I hope they do well. Let's not take the easy route. Critically acclaimed creators of RPGs with deep stories, interesting characters, incredible discussions, and wonderful themes. Show me the guy who doesn't like medieval fantasies and didn't play The Witcher 3, why everyone is sucking your dick, CD Projekt Red. Show me why so many people laud you as the pinnacle of developers in the modern gaming industry. So those are a few of the things that I hope are in the game or would be implemented. I have high expectations for the game, but what I've seen so far I like the look of. I would very much like to see more. I'd very much like to see those 50 minutes of gameplay that were relegated only to a bunch of video game journalists whose opinions I don't value, and YouTubers, all but 2 of them having nothing substantial to say or show. But so far, what I've seen, I'm looking forward to. This and Scorn are the only 2 games coming out in the future that are day 1 buys. I really hope it's not years and years away like so many people have been speculating on, considering the developers' comments. If they specifically delay the release so it can be released in 2020, you know, that meme number, that reference to the RPG that the game takes place in its universe, that would be kinda crappy, but whenever it's released, I do hope it's a good game. I do hope it shows other game companies making RPGs how to make good ones, what to do with them. I hope it's an incredible world to explore in, that there's a lot of replay value, that it's as good, if not better, than Fallout New Vegas. So let me know what you're looking forward to, or don't, it's up to you. But I hope you enjoyed this video, that I gave you something to think about and otherwise entertained you. Take care.